We now know that the train involved in Monday's deadly Amtrak crash was going almost 3 times as fast as it should have been. Before we knew that, President Trump tweeted about it. He said the crash, quote, shows more than ever why our soon-to-be submitted infrastructure plan must be approved quickly. $7 trillion spent in the Middle East while our roads, bridges, tunnels, and more crumble, not for long. He called it soon to be submitted, but a plan is still yet to be seen. Mr. Trump had made infrastructure reform one of his key campaign promises, and he has even touted it since then.
Our infrastructure is a disaster. We have to rebuild our country. We have to rebuild our country, and we have to rebuild it properly and fast.
Wouldn't it be great to have a great builder in charge of like a country that has to spend billions and billions and trillions on infrastructure?
My infrastructure plans will rebuild your roads, your bridges, your tunnels, your railways, your airports, and they are a mess. Americans deserve the best infrastructure anywhere in the world. They deserve roads and bridges that are safe to travel and pipes that deliver clean water into their homes.
Kathryn Wolfe is a transportation editor for Politico, and she joins me now via Skype in Houston. Welcome to you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So we've heard President Trump talk about infrastructure since the campaign. What specifics do we know about what kind of plan he wants?
Well, so the latest that I can tell you is that the White House plans to release about a 70-page principles document. And what I mean by that is it's going to be an outline of what the White House wants to see in an infrastructure plan. But I think it's important to note that it's not going to be anything necessarily fully formed. And what I mean by that is that they're expecting Congress to then take it and then flesh it out into an actual piece of legislation. So within that, I think it's equally important to note that it, as an infrastructure plan, it's writ large, meaning it's not only airports and rail and transit, but also things like possibly energy-related items and even maybe veterans hospitals. So it's a very broad range of things.
Is there a timeline, Kathryn, for when we might see it?
Yes, they've promised it before his State of the Union speech, which is scheduled for January 30th. But the timeline for this, more details on his plan, has also slipped a few times. But right now, the deadline is end of January.
Well, we know that this is a White House that's been focused on regulatory relief. Can infrastructure reform happen without a direct investment from the federal government?
Well, I think that's something that Democrats certainly are asking. I think that, but I will say that part of this plan does involve about $200 billion worth of federal expenditures. And what they're hoping to do is use this $200 billion to spur other investments. For instance, the idea is that they would take this money and use it to incentivize cities and states to come up with their own money. And pretty much the ones that come up with the most money are the ones that are going to get the most preference for federal dollars.
Well, what areas of our infrastructure do you think require the most immediate attention?
Well, I think if you look at pretty much across everything has a fairly large backlog of projects. And if you think of infrastructure as something that needs maintaining, especially anything that we already have is going to need upgrades. And then as we grow as a country, we also need new capacity. And so all of those things are pressures that are borne to bear pretty much every mode of transportation. Our airports, our rail lines, our transit lines, our highways, all needs at least some amount of improvements. And the backlog for infrastructure broadly is in the billions of dollars.
And why do you think this hasn't been tackled so far in this administration or in ones past?
In terms of the backlog, I think it requires a lot of money. And in terms of why it hasn't actually, a lot of the backlog hasn't gotten resolved is because Congress simply hasn't been willing to find the amount of money necessary to do it. What we have right now is basically only enough to maintain the status quo. And I don't think that this White House or President Obama is the same thing. He didn't want to raise a gasoline tax to pay for it, which is the sort of primary way that we pay for these kinds of things. And the other thing, too, is I think the tax overhaul bill that's working its way through Congress now, a lot of people, mostly Democrats, had hoped that it would contain some money for infrastructure, but it doesn't. So I think a lot of lawmakers on the Hill feel that it's a missed opportunity.
All right, we'll watch to see what happens here in the coming year. Kathryn Wolfe from Politico. Kathryn, thanks very much.
Thank you.